and good day, everybody. Welcome to the Recovery Centered Podcast. My name is Tim Roberto. Carol Wick is our guest today, and it's lovely to have you and to speak with you, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be down here and be able to have a conversation and meet you.
Yeah, and it's really amazing. It's very interesting work what you're doing because you're a licensed trauma therapist, you're a researcher, you're a tremendous advocate. You've actually moved, right? You've gotten legislation. You were behind getting legislation to the floor, I guess, right, for vote. Yeah. Incredible. Like, what happened?
Well, and I've got a global consulting firm that helps scale nonprofits. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I started out as at age 5 in the 1980s. I'm joking, of course, but as a child sexual abuse trauma therapist, and I thought I wanted to go and be a pediatrician. Did some internships in the medical space and said, I don't want to do that. So shifted my career into counseling and did some work in child welfare for a few years, first part of my career, and then worked for 13 years in juvenile justice, working with at-risk girls, doing some research in prisons, running an alternatives program for girls, keeping them out of jails and institutions. And then ran one of the largest domestic violence shelters in the United States for 10 years.
Wow.
Did, consulting work around the globe and built the first kennel at a domestic violence shelter in the U.S.
First what?
Kennel. So they could bring their pets with them when they flee.
Oh, my gosh.
And so we did some really great, I had an amazing team. We did some great work there and then started Sharity Global 10 years ago.
Wow.
So it's been a quite a journey. And then as my volunteer work, I work with sexual abuse trauma survivors and help them pass legislation to help make sure that the things that happen to them don't happen to other people.
Carol, was there something that just grabbed you as obviously as a caring, bright, dedicated human being? Was there something that grabbed you that said, I need to dedicate, I don't want to be a pediatrician. I'm going to do this. Is there, did you was it one day kind of you had that white flash or?
I always wanted to work with children, and I knew that if I was going to work with children, I had to be able to work with the whole family. So back then, family therapy was still sort of a new, evolving thing.
Is that in all categories or just in your space?
No, I think just in the field
general?
of counseling, family therapy was fairly new. I mean, there was clinical social work and mental health counseling. So, it was just the beginnings of Mnuchin and all the kind of early researchers were doing their work, Haley. And, there were 2 programs in the country that were really, they only took 10 people a year. I mean, it was really small. Wow. And so I got accepted to both and went to Auburn. I'm just got really drawn into working in the trauma space. I did an initial internship in the emergency room, working with families coming in, and really just enjoyed it and was just really inspired by the work that Mnuchin was doing in Philadelphia in the trauma space. And so that's kind of the direction that I went, starting out doing in-home and in-school therapy with kids and their families.
So it's like you're in that first responder space almost, right? You just didn't have a dedicated uniform or, because that's pretty intense, right? You can go from 0 to 100 just like a first responder.
Well,
right, working in the trauma unit in a hospital.
Absolutely, and you're working with doctors and nurses and law enforcement coming in, and I think, shortly into my career, I was working on a multidisciplinary task force and treatment team. So we were doing everything from gathering the evidence when a child was abused all the way through making sure that the family had what they needed, and then up through prosecution. And I did expert witness testimony. And so that multidisciplinary team and really looking at, that secondary trauma And that's some of the work I do right now. I work with children's advocacy centers around the country, and they have those multidisciplinary teams of the law enforcement and the therapists and the prosecutors, and really making sure that that secondary trauma that they experience and just witnessing what they have to go through and what the children experience, making sure that we're doing things very deliberately to create environments that reduce that trauma, that give them the kind of outlet and support that they need to be able to continue to do the work. 'Cause it is brutal. It is really,
very
really
demanding.
brutal.
Very demanding. Do you ever feel sometimes like after a day's work, regardless of how many years you've been doing it, like, oh man, that was heavy?
Yeah, like, I think, now I'm a little bit more removed in that I am working with the responders. I'm not working with the clients so much I'm working with the people who are doing the work, the helpers.
Gotcha.
So they are the responders, whether they're a nonprofit CEO or, law enforcement, whatever. It really is. I think just people don't understand what they're going through on a daily basis. If I make a mistake and someone dies, being in that space, I think that was also when I was running CEO at the domestic violence shelter. You have this real appreciation for somebody who's answering a hotline at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
And somebody calls, and it's almost like being a 911 operator, except they actually get in the car and go out and pick that person up and extract them from that situation.
That's part of the job, though, right?
It is. It's part of the job. And people don't realize, the impact that has.
Oh my gosh,
just in keeping people alive, but also on people's mental health.
Is there a protocol that you came up with over the years? That was interesting that they go out. I didn't realize that. I thought like law enforcement would be called or something.
No.
Is there a protocol like for safety like that you implement? You train them in that kind of?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And part of it was really, I think, in giving them the power to be able to say, I feel safe at this pickup place, or I don't feel safe. We had a meeting one time, and one of the advocates said, I don't feel safe, and it was a fairly bad area of town, at a Walmart, which was open 24 hours a day. So we thought, well, of course that would be a safe place. People can go into the Walmart and be safe. They're like, yeah, I don't feel safe there.
Wow.
And the perpetrator could just follow that person into the Walmart. There could be a shooting. So we started brainstorming, and they said, well, why don't we meet at the police substation? You get people with, a much safer pickup point.
Yeah.
So, we did a lot of work around listening to what the people that were going out and putting themselves in harm's way, what they needed. I think sometimes we just assume.
Yeah.
But having those open conversations and creating that culture where, safety was one of our priorities, and not just safety for the victim, but safety for the staff as well.
Boy, that's really interesting. I got all kinds of questions, but I guess the first one I'll throw out there is, do you have a baseline of the absolute don'ts when you first initially contact, or like say you as, the status, the level you're at, like somebody with trauma? Is there absolute don'ts or do's, I should say? Is there do's and don'ts initially? So, the call comes in, you have an advocate that's answering at 2 a.m. Are they on their way? Are they listening to like maybe the training or something that, okay, I definitely can't do this because I'm just, is there do's and don'ts, I guess.
Yeah, I think, when I had some pretty hard rules that we had, and when I was the CEO, and one of them was, we don't say no. We might say we can't do that, but we'll find somebody who can.
Gotcha.
And we would also always err on the side of taking someone in to shelter, even if it meant sleeping on the sofa that night. So I always used to tell my staff that, I had pretty early on in my career at the domestic violence shelter, I had an advocate come up to me, and she said, the worst part of my job is telling people that we don't have room. that we can't take them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
she said,
hard.
don't make me do that again. So we had a rule. We never used the words "we're full." And we would come up with a hotel room or, someplace for the person to go. And, making sure that they were safe that night. And it might be that the next day they might not be with us, but that night we were going to err on the side of caution so we didn't have somebody in the bed.
But it's kind of mission accomplished, really, right? You gave that person one more day and one night of safety and comfort, a shower, like a
meal.
A meal.
Right.
I mean, it's beautiful. Did you have anybody like specifically, they were the resource finder? Did you have people like that?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like what you're doing needs a ton of resources.
Well, and I think that's something when I train new therapists that I try to teach them is that your job is not to sit in an office and talk to somebody. Your job is to really be that person that breaks the barriers down. And so we spent a lot of time and had case managers and that sort of thing. But we called everybody was an advocate.
Yeah.
And that's about advocating for what that person needs to be able to help themselves. And I think, you asked what's our number one to do, and it's listen, don't assume. Because when you're in a crisis situation, a lot of times we come from a place of power over, not power with. And I mean, that's,
I like that.
And
I like that.
Yeah. And being able to come from that power with, it's you tell me what you need. And we actually implemented some research that they had done at the Gates Foundation, believe it or not, on how to help survivors of domestic violence find permanent housing. And what we found was that shelter is really not the best thing for the vast majority of survivors of domestic violence. In fact,
it's interesting. Because they're corrupted or something, or
no, it's most survivors, believe it or not, have jobs. They're living in a home. A lot of times, they're the ones paying the rent or the mortgage.
Gotcha.
And in order to be safe, we're asking them to flee and become homeless.
Gotcha.
And 75%. This is the research that we have. 75% of people who come into a domestic violence shelter either end up homeless or back with their abuser. So the Gates Foundation said, well, let's see if we can do this differently. And so what they did was they would ask them, what do you need? Novel concept. And then they would have unallocated funding to solve that problem. And so sometimes we would get a car out of impound or pay for somebody's CNA license, get their bus driver certificate renewed, and pay the first 2 months of daycare. It really varied, but it allowed them to do what they needed to be able to do to get out their feet under them. And then they would just go directly from that abusive relationship and situation into a new stable housing environment.
So like financial worries, I guess, make it difficult too, right? On the person receiving the violence and abusive relationship, right? The financial insecurities. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Do you think they get to a point where they don't want to leave their abuser?
Well, I think, again, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's not just the financial abuse, which is huge. But I think it's finding that you have somebody who trusts you to know how to get yourself out of it, and then putting you in a space where it's like, well, yeah, this could really work. This could help me do that. And now you're in control. Instead of somebody else being in control.
Does that scare a lot of people, you think?
Oh, yeah, that's terrifying. I mean, especially
I'll have to be responsible. People will count on me. You think that scares people?
I think it's scary. I think it's even scarier when you've had somebody controlling all aspects of your life.
For years, right? For so long now. It's like
right. And constantly, when you're it's whether you're in a combat situation or whether you're in a domestic violence situation. It's very similar in that you're constantly on eggshells, never knowing when the bullets are going to fly, the violence is going to erupt, and it's this constant hyper-vigilance, and it creates, the endorphins and everything else, so there's this constantly going. It creates an an inability to do anything but just survive. That's why they call them survivors. And to then have to get into a planning mode and have to be able to say, okay, I have to think, not just survive in the moment. I think that, worked with a lot of veterans organizations. That's a hard thing too. They come back, and one of my clients was telling me about a veteran that they were working for, and he was standing at the kitchen counter making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for his kids, and he just was struggling with that because 6 weeks earlier he had been, in Afghanistan, and it was just the shock from going from that to the calmness.
His mind was probably getting flooded.
Absolutely, and I think it's the same thing. And we sometimes we make it different, but it is really the similarities between the two are just the similarities, the symptoms that come out of that, the ability to have to shift and retrain your brain.
It's like you're out of your hula hoop, kind of. And you really don't know how to function.
I think, though, in a domestic violence situation, we tend to blame the victim for not wanting to leave. But with veterans, they don't really have an option. They're there or they aren't. But if we think about them in a similar way, the recovery process is very similar.
Like we were talking before we turned on the mics and the cameras, so to say, it's the body truly does keep score. And it does morph genes. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that passes on and trauma to their children.
The generational curse, or they morph and they take on different. Do you believe in that, like the genetic stuff? And
absolutely. I mean, we would see women coming in pregnant. And then they would give birth while they were living in the shelter, and you could see those children had experienced that trauma while they were in utero, and there's research now that supports that.
When you say see, sorry to interrupt you, Carol, like, is there certain words that they use, certain body language, like certain, just how they're showing up? There's a little bit of everything, like you can tell, kind of like.
Well, you can see the infants just tense.
Tense.
And as opposed to a normal newborn that hadn't experienced trauma. A lot of times we would see younger children come in who were severely developmentally delayed, but we would see them over the course of a couple of weeks calm and relax and start to go into deep REM sleep and even start talking.
The feeling of safety?
Absolutely.
Right?
That feeling of safety and being in a safe environment and not being woke up at night, not hearing the screams and, the violence. You could see the night terrors would reduce. We tracked things like bedwetting, all of those things, and you could see significant trauma reduction in children. And they're so much more resilient than we are as adults.
Oh my gosh,
But you do have to give them time to be in that safe space to recover.
Do you feel like trauma, like severe, that you're involved in? Do you feel they can go into recovery like I can as an alcoholic in recovery of 18 years and mental health? Do you feel that it's kind of like the same level, for lack of a better word, at the moment? Like, I feel I've fully recovered because I continue to work on myself every day. It's just part of the deal. Can they have a full recovery, severe trauma, people?
I mean, I think, I think it's a daily basis, work on a daily basis.
Kind of I have to.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about recovery, it's I think it's the symptomology of trauma and how our body chooses to respond to that trauma, whether that's night terrors, body memories, flashbacks, whatever, your hallucinations, depression, your body chooses whatever that trauma response is going to be, and that can change over time. And so I think one thing is that people have to understand is that recovery, as you put it, is not a one and done. It is a lifelong journey. And whether, you don't I always used to, when I was working with rape survivors, a lot of times if they had had a childhood trauma, they would have come back into counseling because their child had hit a certain developmental stage that they were in when they were abused. And they didn't even realize that was triggering for them, or something would happen and it would trigger something. They'd need to come back into counseling. Yeah. So I think that we sometimes, when we use the term recovery, it's like, okay, it's done. I don't have to worry about it anymore. But it's really about how we learn to cope, I think. Yeah. And learning that it's okay. Yeah. And that we just need to continue on a daily basis to build our toolkit.
Yeah, as an esteemed researcher like you, because you've been researching the trauma and that space for many years now, right? Collecting data and everything. Do you feel like trauma, and especially in early childhood, do you feel or it alters somebody's physical condition? Like, do you think like schizophrenia can come out of it? Something medical, like along those lines, like be borderline, or do you feel that they're related? Some of these traumatic events for young kids?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we used to see a much higher percentage of children with autism.
Oh, wow.
And I think, when you look at a spectrum, everybody's kind of on that spectrum, right? With catatonic schizophrenia at one end, and then somebody who's, I don't know, is there somebody who's at this end might be over friendly and not, I don't know. Yeah. What that all is, but somewhere along there we all kind of, I think, float. But I think trauma can definitely alter how we perceive the world and how we respond to the world, which is really what schizophrenia is. I think the challenge is that we have a lot of people doing diagnosis that really are lazy. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, good.
And they label people, especially women, I think much more so than men, but we tend to label people for insurance purposes or because you have to, because of their job, rather than stepping back and saying, what else could this be? And I mentioned the young woman that had been labeled as schizophrenic because she was having hallucinations. And they just assumed it was schizophrenia. Well, it happened to be epilepsy. Oh, gee. And so, with so many young children, and especially those in poverty, more likely to be in a home where there might be violence or in a community where there's violence. And they're labeled as ADHD and put on medication. And so, with having that label and then being forced onto a medication, which doesn't help you address the symptoms, the true symptoms and the basis for the trauma, then you end up masking it and making the situation worse, and people then end up to other drugs.
It's kind of like just hitting a pause button, right? Like it doesn't.
I think it's even worse because then it numbs you.
Yeah, but it doesn't, like you said, like it doesn't treat the condition, like the cause and condition. That's not, what's that doing? Like there's no skill set or there's no processing. Right. It's just open up.
Yeah, well, and if you isolate, and you say, okay, in this environment you're not functioning well in school, but then we don't look at the fact that, hey, this kid goes home at night and watches violence happening. There's a shooting every night in the neighborhood, or whatever it might be. Yeah. This kid's experiencing trauma, and we don't get that kid out of that environment so that they can heal. We just put a pill and say, we're going to numb you to what you're witnessing on a regular basis. We're not doing that kid or that family any favors.
You made me think about like the video games, so it's kind of, they can contribute, I'm sure, right? Some of these games, over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. You get kids that get lost in that. They lose sense of night and day.
You mentioned something, too, before about the CEOs of nonprofits. That sparked my interest. Like, so lack of self-care? Like, like they have a lot of trauma because they are still in the front lines, a lot of them, and they're losing people. Like, can you explain that? I'm not sure.
Well, it's a really, I think, being a nonprofit CEO or nonprofit executive is, it's really hard. And a lot of people don't realize that, you aren't friends with your staff, right? You really can't be friends with your board because they're your boss. And then, you have to have this very isolating position where you're beholden to donors. You're beholden to your board.
Gotcha.
You're beholden to your staff.
Gotcha.
You've got the mission. You've got the weight of a very, right now especially, unstable funding environment where things change on a daily basis. But I think, there isn't an environment where we say, let's give the nonprofit CEO, make sure they have counseling or a coach or, somebody for them.
Some self-care.
It's self-care.
Right, yeah.
And so I see unbelievable health crises, high blood pressure, migraines, lots of challenges that they have that are unaddressed until they end up in the hospital. And even then, it's like, I had one woman tell me, she says, I took 2 days off when I had breast cancer for chemotherapy.
Oh, jeez.
2 days. Had a mastectomy and breast and chemo, and she took 2 days off. And I can remember in labor doing the petty cash reconciliation in the hospital. And I look back on that now and I think, what was I thinking?
No kidding, right?
But we do things like that. And we don't have that separation. It's like we can't take time off. We can't be away.
Sometimes the world can be like the ultimate distraction. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's great. Yeah.
It's
so what are you working on now? Like where are you at? How many 9,000 things are you doing now?
Oh my gosh.
Talking about self-care,
Yeah, right. I just started 2 new companies, but that's a whole other conversation.
Shocking, Maybe I shouldn't have gone there.
Well, our company, we're actually doing some really exciting work. We're working actually with an organization called the John W. Brick Foundation, which focuses on empowering people to maintain and control their own mental wellness. And if you think of mental health as the continuum of working with a psychiatrist and the medical professional, which is sometimes necessary, but mental wellness is those things that we can do for ourselves, like create a support system, like have physical health and good nutrition, all of those things, and helping empower people to be able to control their own mental wellness so they can rely less, hopefully, on the institutional options. So we've been doing some work with them, helping them scale and grow their work, which is very important in this day and age. And we work with a whole host of other organizations. We've been doing some research on the child outcomes and child welfare and what are some of the best practices around that. So we're doing a research study right now on outcomes around that.
Is this a nonprofit that you have?
No, this is actually our for-profit business, Sharity Global.
Okay.
And so we work with a whole host of nonprofit organizations all over the globe.
Wow.
We've hit our 33rd country last year.
Really?
Yep.
Holy cow! How does somebody connect with you or partner with you, or do you have information like?
Absolutely. I mean, you can reach out to us at charityglobal.com, and it's Sharity, like Sharity.
Okay.
Global.com.
Oh, share. Yeah.
And
wow.
and so we work on helping them have a business plan, make sure that the work that they're doing is impactful and is really making change.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of research around that and impact work around that, and then helping them figure out sustainable revenue strategies.
Oh, wow.
Everything from earned revenue to fundraising.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, there's so many people that have good hearts.
Yes.
And they want to do good.
Yes.
But they don't know how to, how do I put it? like run it as a business because
right.
it's a business,
yeah,
real,
it is a
right?
business. It's a business, but it is a different kind of business.
Yeah.
It's not like a for-profit where I have a contract with a client and they pay me.
Yeah.
Right? You do work for somebody and they can't pay you usually. And so you have to figure out how to get someone who's not necessarily directly benefiting from the service to pay you. Whether that's the government or donors or foundations. And so that's where, in the work that I've done and the research that I've done, it's so critically important to know that the work that you're doing really is making a difference and it really is changing what you think it is changing. And I always use the example of Great and Dare, which are the programs that were started and run by law enforcement officers for years. And they did longitudinal research on it, and they found that the kids who actually weren't there the day that they offered Great and Dare were less likely to use drugs than the kids who had the program.
Oh, wow.
So it's that sort of thing that you have to like step back and go, wait a minute.
Wait, did you were one of the driving forces of Dare?
No. That was it's just an example.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Of the research.
Yeah.
And I think domestic violence shelters are a great example. They we assume we need more shelters and more shelters because there's probably there's tens of thousands of people that are turned away from domestic violence shelters every single day in the U.S. who need to get out of that relationship. But we also know that 75% of them are not going to get that long-term help. So what do we need to be doing differently? So that's really a space that we're in is helping that organization say, okay, here's where we want to be long-term. Here's the impact it will have, and this is how much it's going to cost us to get there.
Yeah.
And those are probably the three most important questions we help our clients answer.
Wow.
And it's environmental groups to homelessness and gender-based violence. You name it, we're probably working with them.
What do you know off the top of your head how many men deal with domestic violence or victims of domestic violence?
So
you have a stat?
It's about 10%.
That
actually,
go silent, kind of, right? Like
it's very. I mean, we used to have men in the shelter, and it's very hidden. Men don't like to talk about it. It's. I think the dynamics are a little bit different because this systems support men's violence against women. And women tend to be prosecuted at higher rates, convicted at higher rates, and get harsher sentences. So there's not the same situations, but it is still can be very devastating. Can be very difficult to get help and to find a place where you feel safe if you're a man.
Would you say it's kind of like even like physical and emotional, or is it when it's women on men? Is there more of an emotional, or is it more physical? Or
I mean, it can be physical, but you don't see the homicides. I mean, the leading cause of death for pregnant women in the United States is being murdered by your partner.
What?
It is not preeclampsia. It's not bleeding to death during pregnancy. It is being murdered.
Really?
Yes. And for a woman of color, you're more likely to die once you become pregnant than at any other time. But people don't
mean because of the birth.
Because of the pregnancy that causes the violence in that relationship to escalate.
Oh, gotcha.
And but yeah, it's the leading cause of death of pregnant women in the United States is being murdered.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's epidemic.
Yeah.
It's epidemic. And
holy cow. That just blew me away.
You just don't see that with men, and then that I think is the difference. A lot of times we'll hear what about men, but. Men aren't dying at the rate that women are dying, and there aren't the systems in place to hold the men who are violent accountable.
Wow.
One of the groups that we're working with is a group called Callisto, which has an encrypted database where people can upload information about rapists if they've been sexually assaulted. And right now they're just doing it on college campuses for staff and students.
Good.
And they get about 200 uploads a month right now. They're hoping to increase that. But what they find is that for every 200 uploads, they find a serial rapist.
Wow.
And they connect with AI. They connect these cases. And most college campuses, a quarter of all women who go to college will be raped.
Oh my
And
gosh!
most of them,
Like the beer parties and that.
a lot of it,
Probably
yeah,
driving a lot.
dating, yeah. And
Wow.
most of those rapes are committed by serial rapists.
Wow.
And yet you would think
Yeah.
that there would be a
Yeah.
huge effort to stop serial rapists on college campuses, but there's not. And most of those serial rapists will leave college and go on to rape again.
Just pretend nothing's happening, kind of, right?
Right. And so,
And what about if a woman, a young kid, reports? It's like,
yeah. And a lot of times they're silenced, and I've even seen victim service centers at colleges try to dissuade them from reporting because they don't want the statistics. You know, it's a and that's
culture. It's a culture.
It's a culture, right? and that's why data is so important. It's why I love research, because if you don't have the data, you can't tell the story. You can't make the case of the importance of it.
Yeah. Wow, that just blew me away. I had no idea. What do you? Is there a personality disorder? Connected to that kind of stuff, like sex addict, borderline?
No, and they've done research on that, interestingly enough. And because when I started doing domestic violence work, I thought there's got to be a personality disorder attached to this, right?
Yeah.
And they've done a lot of research, and there's not. It is all about how you're raised and about this belief that you have the right to control another person's life. And then we see higher rates in law enforcement and military and positions of power. Yeah. And those people are drawn to those careers. Yeah. Those careers do not create abusers. So we'll see people who are, like I think the most recent statistic is somewhere around 40% of law enforcement officers abuse their wives or their children. And
when you say abuse, does that include like the standard emotional, physical,
emotional, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
control, and the control. Like, I mean, I still counsel people, and I tell people that I can pick up because I listen to understand.
Right.
That empowers everybody more. So I pick up. It just seems like I always tell people that control is abuse.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, oh, my God, like I'm doing with you with so many other statistics you've been doing.
Yeah.
A lot of them say, oh, my God, really? I was like, well, think about it.
Yeah.
Who has the right to deny you of your due process? Mm-hmm. Right? It's your due process, not mine.
Right.
I mean, I can help you if you ask me, but I can't control you.
Right.
So, wow, that makes sense.
Yeah. And they grow up in homes and environments, and they're trained that I have the right to control you. I'm better than you. You have to do what I tell you to do. And usually that's a gender thing.
Yeah.
From a lot of cultures.
And we teach people how to treat us.
Well, and when you look globally, most women are living in countries where domestic violence isn't even against the law.
Oh my gosh!
And in Russia they decriminalized domestic violence, and you don't even go. It's not even criminal unless you're hospitalized. Your partner's hospitalized from the injuries. And then a lot of places where it's not criminalized unless you're married, or if you are married, then it isn't criminal.
Wow.
I mean, there's just a whole host of things. So
that's too bad. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so when you bring people into the country and then they bring that culture with them, where wait a minute, this isn't wrong.
That's all you know.
Right, it's what you know.
So it's like, a lot of people I've heard over the years, I hate my father, I hate my mother for what they did, And as you're a therapist, I'm a counselor, and I think for me, I always tell people, look, how about we look at what was given them, because I really believe, you might not like this right now, but I believe they're just operating on what was given them.
Right.
Just like you're operating, or me or anybody else is just operating on what was given you,
right.
Yeah,
and I think my grandparents and, my mom was horrifically abused as a child and didn't remember it until she was in her 50s. And then just all came flooding back.
Wow. Holy cow.
And, I think about some of the decisions that she made and some of the parenting choices that she made, and it made sense. It didn't make it okay necessarily, but it made sense. And I think about that sort of thing when I had already gotten my degree and already become a child trauma therapist and then learned this. So that was, for me, a moment to kind of readjust. People in my life that all of a sudden I have a whole different view of. But I think that kind of upbringing, you have to accept people that they do the best they can, even if the best they can is pretty bad. Right?
With what they had.
Yeah.
So you took on a lot of those behaviors, kind of like when like a lot of people I work with, like they're para-alcoholics, right? Because they grew up in an alcoholic environment, but they don't use substances, but their mental health is really disrupted,
Mm-hmm.
So and then they tell you, well, I grew up with alcoholics. I said, well, has anybody ever taught you? Because so many people, you probably experience it, so many people you work with, they're always like, I don't know. And I always made it a goal of mine, like, gosh, I want to know as much as I can until I can't. Because I can only imagine what would happen to somebody's life if they began to know, excuse me. You know?
Yeah.
They're para-alcoholics, right? They run parallel to the behaviors of alcoholism, even though they don't drink or abuse substances. So kind of like your mom was brought up in a very, rough.
Yeah.
So like you received a lot of that, right? A lot of that messaging, sort of say.
Yeah.
Maybe not the backhand or whatever, but the messaging that comes with it, right? Like.
Well, and it's interesting because she didn't remember it while I was growing up. She had
that's right. She
created
had it
kind of this other childhood.
Now, do you think? Excuse me for interrupt. Do you think, Carol, that you were picking up on that as a kid through intuition? Like, is there something missing? Did you ever get that?
Oh, yeah. There was absolutely a lack of protective capacity, a blindness that she just didn't see. I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful mother and father, and they, I think, created support systems that were incredible, and I think my aunt had a very good protective capacity. So she protected us from a lot of things that my mom was, she didn't remember. My aunt did remember, my mom didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that looking back on it, I can see that now. But I think the other thing that was really good is that because we had this just wonderful safety network, and some of the kids don't have that now, but every Wednesday night supper and all those sorts of things, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, we just had this social network that was really safe. And we had a lot of really safe people around us.
So Mom was kind of like what I've heard in my lifetime, like I grew up like that, but I wasn't going to subject my kids to that kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to do it different. Like, so like, I guess for lack of a better way to put it right now, kind of like broke that generational curse, kind of.
Well, yeah, I think so.
In a way,
I think so. I think she did the best she could.
With what she had.
Yeah, with what she had.
Yeah,
and
good
I
old
think,
Mom.
and honestly, with what she was given, unbelievable job. And I think there are a lot of parents that do. But again, I think you have to go back and understand that what you may think of as not a good parent. I think sometimes, my daughter just became a mom.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we've been having these conversations.
You're a grandma? You look too young to be a grandma.
I have 5 grandkids, all under the age of 2.
Really?
Yes.
How many kids do you have?
I have 1 and 2 stepsons.
Gotcha.
And,
5?
they all got married in the last 2.5 years, and have had. We just had twins 8 weeks ago.
Welcome to the next stage.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, it
everything just got
wild.
elevated.
Yeah, it is a wild ride. I love every minute of it. But we've had some interesting conversations about. She's like, "This is hard." I'm like, "Yes, it is unbelievably hard." And you do the best you can, right? And I made mistakes, and you'll make mistakes, and you'll look back on it and go, I wish I hadn't done that, but I did it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple. You've heard it 100,000 times. There's not a book,
No,
but it's there's not.
There isn't, and every kid is. I can remember one day with my daughter, thinking, this is not what I thought. I thought I would have this kid, and it would go to Harvard, and they would, and she'd excel at sports and do all this stuff, and this is the kid I got, and she's brilliant, and she's wonderful.
Yeah.
But you have to adjust as a parent, and really, I think my training was so helpful for me because I was able to advocate for her, and I was able to fight for her. And a lot of parents, again, they haven't been trained. They don't
Yep.
know how to do that.
Yep.
They don't know the system.
Yep.
I was really lucky. I could pick up the phone and call people, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it is. It's,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of, you know, going full circle, I think that's what your job is when you work in human services is you do know the system. You do know where the help is.
Yep.
And these
resources.
parents come in and this isn't their thing, right? They don't know how to get help for their child or how to get help for themselves sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's our job, is to do that. And sometimes that's talking to them and listening.
Yep.
And sometimes it's actually knocking on a door and banging the door down.
Oh,
or
yeah.
changing the law.
Yep. Yep.
And I've been really, it's been a wonderful thing that I've been able to do a lot of that in my life.
Yeah. Your bios. Yeah. You're a licensed clinician, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've advocated for how long now for this space in the trauma?
Oh, gosh, since the late 80s.
Since the late 80s. You're a mom. You're a grandma. I was trying to be, just leave it at mom, but
yeah, that's all right. I'm a prom grandma.
You've driven legislation and changed laws.
Yeah.
Your research.
Yep.
As part of that research, as part of the laws that you drove, changed, was all that research you did.
Yeah, some of it. I mean, one of the laws that we changed, the two most recent ones were we ended the statute of limitations for child rape in Florida. Because there was, believe it or not, a statute of limitations. And
that standard 7-year stuff or something?
It was different depending on how old the victim was.
So now there's none. You got rid of
none.
It's done.
You have sex with a child, under a minor, you rape them, have sex with them, which is rape.
Yeah, 100%.
It doesn't matter how long it takes for justice to come, that you are going to be held accountable. The other one is we have a rape kit tracking law now, so that someone who's been raped, who's had a rape kit, can now find out where it is in the process, because they sat for years on shelves and were never tested. And the trauma of not knowing who your perpetrator is and not knowing if they've been arrested or not, that's gone now in Florida. I've also helped pass legislation around, and this was doing research on the system of looking at where does the system get bogged down. So we had legislation passed so that if your perpetrator is arrested, they can't call you from jail.
Wow.
Which, a lot of witness tampering was happening.
Yeah, threats too, right?
Threats.
A lot of threats.
Oh, yeah. Just,
I'll send somebody over your way.
Well,
blah, blah,
or
whatever.
Oh, baby, it was your fault.
Yeah,
it was you, wasn't me.
Yeah, it was the way you dressed.
Yeah,
that's a classic, right?
Yeah, or if you had dinner ready on time, or you just hadn't pushed me so far. It'll never happen again.
Have you been able to? Have you been tracking, like, with all your love for research and advocating? Have you tracked, Carol, like, since these laws have actually gotten on the books? Have you seen a little dip, like now? Like, say you got rid of the
statute of limitations.
Correct. Yeah. Like, has that contributed to a little dip, or is it too early? Or
I think it's allowed law enforcement and prosecutors to arrest people. The problem is it's not retroactive.
Gotcha.
So if you raped a child before the law was enacted, you're still under the old statute of limitations in a lot of cases. But I think the challenge is, and anybody who works in this space knows, that the successful prosecution rate of child rapists is just abysmal. And a lot of times they plead to things that keep them off the sex offender registry, and or they get off, depending if they have money.
What the heck is driving that, you think, Carol? Like, there's some culture going on in there, too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it's like less than... When I used to do, again, I was doing research on domestic violence prosecutions in Orange County, we would have around 11,000 arrests a year.
Wow.
And 1 year they had 100 successful prosecutions.
Out of 11,000?
Out of 11,000.
That's horrible. How pathetic
is horrible.
Is that?
And we're talking about cases where people were stabbed. I mean, like, really clear cut, like, this person should go to jail. They stabbed somebody.
Yeah.
and they would get off.
I just had that thought, like, no wonder so many people just, it's not worth it kind of mentality, right?
Absolutely.
God forbid something, it's not, you know.
It's really easy to say, why don't they leave? And then blame them for not leaving. But when you realize that a lot of them have called 911 and this has been the response, and what they're facing, you know, losing their children, and then a lot of, I've been in court, I can't tell you how many times, and watched a judge say, well, he's raped you and beat you, but we're going to let him have unsupervised visits with your kids.
It's horrible, man.
And, you know, in any other setting, we would say, this person has raped and beat people. We're not going to give them unsupervised contact with children.
It's like it's so demoralizing, isn't it?
It is.
It's like you feel like you're invisible, like you're not even heard. You know? Like you go through this horrific experience, and then you got the people that, why didn't she just leave? And you got those people chirping, but you know, how do you understand something you've never experienced?
Right.
So you got all those birds in the bleachers chirping, and it's like, it's just, for me, it's just lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
Don't listen to those people. Don't listen to them, or don't listen to the people that just let it go. Like there's some magic fairy that's poof. You know, just don't listen to those people.
It's the same with first responders, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're supposed to suck it up. You're supposed to be able to handle it. You're big and tough, and it's like, you know, you see an 18-month-old raped, and
correct.
I mean, I just, you know, that's not something you ever forget.
I was walking. I was an advocating for mental health for first responders, and one of my walks that I was doing, I was talking to a fella, young kid. Yeah. He had the canteen van, you know. I would have never made it without this guy. And he was, you know, he started out as a volunteer, became fire rescue. And a couple years in, he had a call. It was a young kid, and he had to give her a trach on the scene. And he said from doing that and hearing the air escape, and then he lost her. Yeah. He said he just couldn't do it anymore. So it's, these guys are going through the ring. It's a human condition, and
it is.
You know, you're advocating, and I guess now that we kind of got to this part of it, of the podcast, you know, I advocate too for first responders, and Carol and I were talking before we even started, like, I gotta help the best I can. I break that wall. It's a human condition. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with being a hero. You guys are all here. All the men and women, everybody's running one way. They're running towards it. It's not about that. Right. It's about over time, right? Over and over and over and over and over. There's a human being behind the uniform. Right. And so many people, from my understandings, 30 to 33, sometimes 35, depending on what statistics you look or research like you do, are affected by it. The first responders, 30 to 30, up to upwards of 35.
Well, and again, I think that's where people don't really understand the complex trauma piece, which you know,
I like that
trauma that you experience one time. You know, I witnessed a really horrible car accident when I was a child, and it traumatized me. But the trauma that someone who is a first responder or who is a survivor, you know, in domestic violence, human trafficking, where it's over and over, and there's no real sense of escape from it. You know, someone who's deployed and they have to get up every morning and go back and face that danger. You know, we can tell ourselves it's okay, we're okay, and I think that's what domestic violence survivors do on a daily basis. We're okay, I'm okay, this is perfect. They you know, project this perfect family to the outside world. But inside, they're just trying to make it through the day, and they're just trying to survive, and that rewires your brain. And then I think that sets you up for all of those symptoms. It sets you up for needing something to reduce that stress, and a lot of times that's drug abuse, alcoholism, other types of harmful things that we could do to our bodies. And we don't acknowledge that type of trauma requires a different kind of healing because it requires you to reprogram your brain. And, you know, I have one of our former clients that has this program where they go and they get men who are homeless on the streets, chronically homeless, and they bring them into a recovery program. It takes a year. And they focus on rewiring their brains. And so they make them read novels and do book reports because they said when you read just short little snippets of things, it doesn't help you reprogram your brain. But they focus on nutrition and physical health and getting out of debt and paying back what you owe people and it's they have an amazing success rate, but it is they understand that you have to reprogram your mind, and a lot of those people were veterans. They were people who've experienced really severe trauma.
That's why I love CBT.
Yeah.
I think it's phenomenal because I keep it simpler. I mean, that was really phenomenal, but I look at it just like I try to teach people, look, if you want to work with me, I'm going to try to change your thinking because it's your thinking that keeps doing this to you.
Exactly.
So the conversation has to be changed.
Yeah.
So
a therapist that I worked with at one point in time, has a technique called the life-limiting belief. What is it that we're telling ourselves that's causing that raw fear? And what is that? You have to kind of walk yourself through. What is it that we're telling ourselves is going to happen if we don't worry about this thing? And it's really reprogramming that
really
thought process.
It starts every morning for me. I think it starts probably pretty much every morning for everybody. Really, if you want to do it, like affirmations, a lot of people, if you're not there, you're not ready, or whatever the case, you're like affirmations, smashformations, whatever nickname you give, you're like, eh. But it's so true, especially if they're written by people that are just like you or what you're struggling with. You were mentioning Let It Go before, and I thought of Melanie Beatty. Like, she's done such an incredible job, right? She's like branded herself through her own struggle. Like she's taken her pain into purpose, kind of. So it's that. Just changing the conversation is huge.
Well, and I like to say that I'm in recovery from being a type A.
Yeah.
And it took me years to get to a place where I could mentally allow myself to meditate.
Oh, wow.
I had, people was like, oh, you need to meditate. And I'm like, It was changing my thinking first so that I could get my body to a place where I could actually let myself relax. And I think for a lot of people who've undergone trauma, a lot of first responders too, being able to be in a place where you can completely physically relax and shut your head off is a gift for yourself.
Oh, yeah.
That you cannot measure how impactful that is. But if you can't do that, that should be a red flag for you.
Yeah.
That you need somebody to help you get there.
Yeah.
Because if you can't get into that space where you can sit down and just be quiet and not have electronics or something going on, that's a problem. That's where you're going to be tipping yourself over the edge.
We believe a lot of that at Beachway too, because we do a lot of yoga. We have a Buddhist that comes in the yoga, and I use that to my advantage too. If I facilitate a substance abuse group, I said, what about who goes to yoga? They all raise their hands. I said, so where are you at? Like within a minute sometimes. Where are you at?
Right.
What do you mean? All right, so you get into position and it starts, and then we usually start breathing and getting centered. And where are you at in a minute? You're reduced, right? Everything's a little more, They're like, that's a practice. That's a discipline because there's so much authenticity for your soul, your body. Like not this guy, because this guy's always trying to make up a different answer than what the answer really is. It's on a different level, so it's kind of like, right? Like that authenticity of being authentic.
Well, and what a lot of people don't realize is that yoga is designed to be the clearing away so that you could then sit and meditate. And so I was really fortunate to be doing some work with advocates in Nepal and decided to go trekking. And thought that this Florida girl could just like start trekking in the Himalayas. It was an experience. I'm glad I did it. I don't think I'll ever do it again. But being able to be in a space where the energy is just incredible in Nepal. I mean, you're in the tallest place in the world.
Yeah,
but,
beautiful. Gosh.
But getting ready and then being able to just sit and really meditate and hear nothing because there's nothing. I mean, you have to walk, days into the
I love that.
into the wilderness. It's an incredible experience, and I think that is a gift that again, people are like, oh, I'm going to go do yoga because it's exercise. It's not. It's supposed to be about slowing down. It's supposed to be about calm.
Getting
and I
centered,
think in this day and age where, you know, we look around at a restaurant, I'm always disheartened when I see the whole family on their phones. And I think, you know, we have family dinner. That is one of the things that I carried on from my grandmother and my mother. Is I bring everybody, you know, it's optional. If you're free, come.
Yeah, love that.
You never know what I'm going to cook.
Yeah, good.
But, you know, it's a time for people to be together and off their phones and off their, you know, whatever else they're doing. We just need space and time to do that in our lives. And I think that more than anything is a gift to give yourself, and you know, really, if you can't get in that place, to get help to do that.
Are you still practicing? Like, you still have you know, like...
You know, it's funny. I keep my license active, but because I'm also an approved supervisor.
Oh, the QS, right? They call it QS? Qualified supervisor.
Qualified supervisor. But I don't do one-on-one therapy, but I feel like I do it a lot with my clients. Because, again, you know, I'm dealing with a lot of CEOs, and they're dealing with a lot of trauma, and they typically don't have anyone. And so I always laugh because I have some of my team. I've got about 25 on my team, and some of them are executive coaches, and I'm like, I am not an executive coach. I am a therapist, and they're so different, and I cannot go to the coaching piece. I have to go to the therapy piece. But I do spend a lot of time using those skills, and
so they keep them sharp for you. These
absolutely. And it's funny, they're like, "You're doing therapy on me." I'm like, "I absolutely am."
I can't help it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and you know, I just have to be careful not to try to diagnose people. That is, you know, try to do that assessment on folks. But you know, a lot of times you can, when you're dealing with people in life in general, you know, if you do this work. You can sense. And since I've done so many years with an institutional and private practice of working with sexual abuse trauma survivors, I can sense, you know, that there's something that has happened. You can almost get a sense of when it happened. You know, like what point in time in their life they kind of are stuck.
It's that intuition, you know, you do it so long. I think people like me and you, we have a passion to like, I mean, I feel, you know, from a very humble position, I've been given a tremendous skill, you know, skill set, because I believe in my own struggles, you know, with addiction, my mental health. Recovery for me is kind of like the greatest thing I've ever succeeded at. You know, so I can kind of feel me a mile away, as the saying goes, you know. I can just see it, you know. I know how it sounds. I know how it moves. I kind of like know almost, I wouldn't say everything, but I know a lot about it. You know? Like,
and there is a way that people present themselves that you can tell.
You pick up on.
And you know, I'm kind of like, I kind of joked about being in type A, but I literally had a doctor say to me when I was a CEO, he said, probably about 6 months before I left, he said, what's your next job going to be? And I said, I don't know. And he said, because you'll die if you stay in this one.
Oh, jeez.
And he said, your physical health has gotten so bad, you are going to die if you don't change jobs.
Wow.
And so for me, learning what's mine to fix, learning what's, you know, being able to sit back and just listen and not try to fix things, which as a therapist, you can try to help too much, has been a real skill that I have learned in this. I wish I had it in the first part of my life. I probably would have been a much healthier, happier person. But there's just such a wonderful place of being when you get to that recovery, right? From whatever your thing is. And we all have something, whether it's a substance or a thing that we do, you know, it's not healthy.
I don't care. It doesn't matter to me what you're recovering from. You know, but when you're recovering, it's just on a whole nother level. And I don't know, you just have these experiences that you needed to get well first before you could experience them. You know, so, but thank God, you know, that we finally did it, you know, or we're at a place compared to where we used to be. That's a lot better.
It is.
You know, everybody kind of, excuse me, but everybody bitches and moans about Monday. And I'm always like, thank God it's Monday. You know, I mean, compared to the alternative. You know what I mean? So, and we are definitely live down in downtown West Palm. As you can hear, our heroic first responders at the call again. So God bless them. God bless you.
Yeah.
As we're gonna wrap it up, any can they get in touch with you anyway? Like other than the
I mean,
go to
the
Sharity?
website, charityglobal.com,
Okay.
and you can our phone number and emails are on there. You can reach out to me. You know, we do we've got some great resources and helps on our website and our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially if you've got a nonprofit or you know, we work with governments trying to solve major problems, and so we'd love to hear from you.
I think Carol's cool with me speaking for her just this one time. Hopefully, through Carol's our conversation today, we reach that one person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just that one person that doesn't know what to do, who lives in fear, is you know, just really struggling. And hopefully, Carol, between the two of us, you've heard something from her, especially because she's been in it for years. She has a lot of resources. So I think with that being said, thank you, Sharity.com.
Mm-hmm. Sharity Global.
Excuse me, charityglobal.com. If you need something, just reach out. Maybe that one person heard something today. Until the next time, thank you, Carol. It was awesome spending this time with you. And, thank you so much, Beachway, for your support for our community. And you guys take care. And just remember, peace and love.